God done shed his grace on thee. He crowned thy good. Yes, he did. Heavy brotherhood from sea to shining sea. You know,
Hello and welcome to Akeldemah. We're going to be talking, Akeldemah, by the way, means field of blood. We're going to be talking about military and military situations. I'm here today with Colonel Tom Giovanini, who was commissioned as a second lieutenant after completing the ROTC program at Stephen A. Austin University in 1978. He entered active duty in Fort Benning, Georgia in 1979. He had a 30-year career where he served as a rifle platoon leader, company executive officer, battalion adjutant, rifle company commander, battalion operations officer, brigade. He's done just about everything, and in his long distinguished career he's had military education, which includes infantry officer basic, airborne school, ranger school, signal officer advanced course, combined armed services school, command general staff, and he also attended the United States War College. He served in Operation Desert Storm. He did 2 tours of duty in Operation Iraqi Freedom. He was awarded the Army Achievement Medal, 3 awards for Army Commendation Medals, 2 awards of Meritorious Service Medal, the Bronze Star, the Legion. Is there anything that you didn't win? He's also married to Pamela Henderson, or former Pamela Henderson, now Pamela Giovanini, and they have 4 children together, 15 grandchildren, and 1 great-grandchild. 1 is on the way.
Making our own army.
You're making your own army. And so today we want to start talking about some of the things, and we feel the need to really kind of go back and catch up some history, if we can, on the military and some of your experiences, and we're going to be talking about this in the upcoming series, and so we hope that you will join us from week to week. We're going to start really, I guess, in World War II. Right,
but before we get started on that, Ken, let me say that right now, there's a lot of turmoil in this world with COVID, cyber attacks, immigration issues, Antifa issues with some countries around the world threatening our prosperity, those kind of things. And what's important to note is the people that are supposed to be taking care of this are the 3 major institutions of this country, which is the presidency, the Congress of the United States, and our judiciary. Right now, you can find 50% of the people who don't agree with one or the other throughout everything that's going on in this country. There is one institution in this country where Americans are united with, and that's the United States military. They have true faith and confidence in our military and the expectation that we're going to do our job as we're supposed to, subservient to the political leaders of this country. We're not a banana republic. We follow our orders. We're a profession. And what does a profession mean? There's 3 components to that. The first is you have an oath of office to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. The second component of that is we have a Uniform Code of Military Justice, which in itself governs our behaviors. Those that are not correct, you're subject to that with some dire consequences. I've sat on boards where we've had to send young soldiers to Leavenworth for behavior that was not consistent with the principles of the military. The third thing that makes this a profession is that it has an education system, whether you're an enlisted soldier or you're an officer, that takes you from when you first enter into the service to when you retire, whether it be at 20 years or 30 years. So there's a consistent progression of courses and leadership classes that you have to take to be current at your level, your rank, so to speak.
You know, it's funny that you mentioned that. I was reading yesterday that some people were in question on whether they supported the current administration or not, and who were in the military. And their statement was, we support and defend the Constitution of the United States of America. And I think that goes to some of the things that you were talking about. Now, what we want to do is we want to get into how the military has progressed to where we're at today, and we're going to start looking at back in World War II is where we talked about, and then we're going to go through several of the wars that have been in our time frame as far as where we're at today, and we need to understand. So what is the differences that you see in the different skirmishes that we've had around the world, and also what was the difference in like World War II, where we had some objectives that we really knew what we were doing?
World War II, of course, I didn't live it. My parents did, as many of your parents did. Lived through that, lived through the Depression, lived through World War II. But prior to World War II, prior to our entry into World War II, we were just kind of there. We had a small army, average-sized Navy, so to speak of, very almost non-existent type Air Force. Of course, then World War II starts. We're watching what's going on in Europe at that point in time, and then suddenly we're attacked at Pearl Harbor. At that point in time, what really changed was the national pride that Americans took at that point in time, so much so that 12 million Americans at one point, served in the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, and the Merchant Marines in support of that war. You contrast that, just as a contrast quickly, to the Vietnam era, where it was all draft. People were getting exemptions where they didn't have to serve. People were going to college, those kinds of things. And what happened at that point in time was the middle class and the lower classes of the United States were sending their young men to fight in that war, which is completely different than World War II, where everybody went to serve.
How does that affect morale when you have and wasn't tours of duty different then than in current day?
Absolutely. I had an uncle in World War II that fought in North Africa, then Sicily, then Italy, then through France into Germany. In other words, you're over there until it was over. Vietnam, we did one tour. You're there for 13 months, and then you came home. Iraqi freedom, enduring freedom in Afghanistan, the same way. You go do a year's tour of duty, then you come home. Now, back in the Vietnam era, that unit, that flag, that battalion, that brigade stayed there. But individuals rotated in and out. And what is important about that is unit cohesion is busted during that period of time. You know, a sergeant could be looking at 5 different guys in his team, and in a year's period of time, they could all have rotated out, and he's got 5 different guys that he's having to place into combat situations unfamiliar to them, and so the cohesion is not as good as well. Of course, we know what was going on back in the States as the war progressed, 68, 69, how the American people had turned against the war. We're not in favor of the war at that point in time, yet you're still over there trying to fight. Now, the key point to remember there was that there was really no clearly defined objective in Vietnam other than preserving South Vietnam. That was it. World War II was easy. Defeat the Japanese, defeat the Germans. Now, it's bounced from Vietnam to Iraqi freedom and enduring freedom. There was no clearly defined message. I was there early on in Iraq, where it was supposed to be find the weapons of mass destruction. But they never were found. And then the next thing you know, insurgents are hitting us, fighting us, blowing us up. IEDs, EFPs were hitting us, those kinds of things. The infrastructure of the country was busted at that point in time. There was no leadership. We tried to put together a coalition. In Iraq, there was no really clear defined objective. I had an opportunity to be in the area where the ambassador is, where guidance was coming, where the State Department was interjecting guidance, but there was no clearly defined objective. A military has to have a clearly defined objective, a mission statement that says who, what, where, why, when, and how. For example, Desert Storm. We all remember that one. The run up to Desert Storm, when the Iraqis had gone in and taken Kuwait. We put a coalition together, and by coalition I mean United States. There was 32 nations involved. We had French, we had actually Syrian units, we had the French, we had English, we had everybody lined up, 465,000 in that coalition. But the mission was simple. It took six or seven egghead guys working in the Pentagon to come up with a mission statement over a 6-week period of time. And that statement was simple. On 1 February, 0600, 1 February, coalition forces attack to remove Iraq from Kuwait and restore the international boundary. Simple. That's what the military needs. A simply defined mission statement. Easy metrics there, trying to figure out if you accomplished your mission. We did not intend to take over Iraq. We did not attack Baghdad. We didn't attack anything else in that country. We removed them and restored the international boundary. Simple, which is what the military needs. Go back to Iraqi freedom and enduring freedom. As you can see from the results, not a clearly defined mission. Afghanistan is still going on to some degree, almost 20 years later, okay? Because there's never really been a clearly defined mission for our soldiers. Now, the other thing that has changed is the rules of engagement. Go back to World War II, there were no rules of engagement. You're there to win. You're there to fight. I personally saw in Iraq the rules of engagement were such that when you first went there, if somebody had a weapon in their hands, a rifle or something like that, you could engage them. That changed almost overnight from the State Department through the ambassador, that you couldn't fire at them unless they're firing at you first. Then there are instances where mosques could not be a target. Religious shrines and stuff like that cannot be a target, even if you're taking fire from them. So that changed. So what I'm trying to say is, for the military to be totally effective, they have to have a clearly defined mission. You know, when they're on the streets of Washington, D.C. recently, there's not really a clearly defined mission, and you're putting soldiers in harm's way, asking them to do police work, so to speak, and that's not what they're trained to do.
The other time that we were acting as a police unit was actually in Vietnam, pretty much, and we all know that that did not work out too well. So not having a clearly defined objective is really a recipe for disaster all the way around. And so we need to know what we're doing, and that's pretty much true in all of life. You know, no matter what you're doing, you've got to know what you're doing. A company needs an objective. A company needs a mission statement. And without a mission statement, failure is almost imminent.
That's correct. You have to have goals and objectives, intermediate goals, as you progress to the final objective. Once you've decided what that's supposed to be, you have to have that. Bouncing back to Korean War, when North Korea invaded South Korea, we intervened. It was pretty dire there at the very beginning, and then we got the upper hand, and then we started pushing north, and then we pushed into North Korea. We're pushing them back, and we're fighting them, and being quite successful. Suddenly, though, without warning, 300,000 Chinese decided that they were going to enter in, and then we had some major battles at that point in time. The rules of engagement came up at that point in time because fighter jets from airfields based right across the border in China were attacking our pilots, attacking our ground troops, doing all those kinds of things. We were pursuing them to start with, but then it was stopped. We were not allowed to cross into China in hot pursuit of those fighter aircraft. That's where the politicians got involved in the warfare aspect of it, of winning the fight. And that's a mistake that politicians make, thinking they know better than the commander on the ground what needs to be done. When I was in the War College in 2003, the then Secretary of State was a person I think everybody knows, Colin Powell, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the planning agent for Desert Storm over General Schwarzkopf at that time. But he was addressing us, and we're talking about Iraq and the morass it was already turning into. The initial invasion had already taken place. And he said famously, we broke it, now we've got to fix it. What he was saying is we busted all the institutions in that country without a clearly defined objective, and that's why we got into this. And it got worse as time went on. First few years in Iraq were pretty bad, I can tell you.
So when you were in Iraq, let's talk about that for a minute. And before we go too much further in that direction, what I'd like to do is encourage young people how important it is, because we talked about, at one time we had a volunteer force, and then we moved into the Vietnam era where we had a draft. And now we're back to volunteerism. And let's talk about how important it is that we continue to have young men, outstanding young men and women, serve in our military. For just, take a moment and encourage those people, if you will.
It's obvious you'd much rather have somebody who wants to be in the military versus somebody who's conscripted to be in the military for a specified period of time. That goes without saying. An all-volunteer force, initially, it was kind of a tough go, filling up our armed forces, especially at the end of the Vietnam era, when this started to take place, trying to get it. However, we all know what happened on 9/11. When that took place, young men, young women flocked to the recruiting stations, joined the service for the pride of the country, and we were filled up. We actually had an excess of soldier, sailor, airmen, and Marines that had been brought into service at that point in time due to patriot. It was pure patriotism, is what it was at that point in time.
That was really one of the last times the country, we were talking about this yesterday, one of the last times the country was truly united. And the reason for that, as you pointed out, was everybody knew somebody that was actually affected in serving.
Even in desert, well, let me say this. In Iraqi freedom, at that point in time, we mobilized basically 1.3 million people were mobilized. That means that's the sum total of everybody in the armed forces. Everybody was put on alert. That means the National Guard. That means the reserve forces. What that meant is almost every community had an armory, or knew somebody that was serving in that National Guard armory or that reserve force armory. Prior to that, even in Desert Storm, it was Fort Campbell, Kentucky, or Fort Bragg, North Carolina, or Fort Hood, Texas, or all those bases where the military is located. That's what went to war. Those were the places that had Congress people. Now, every community, every congressperson, every member of the House of Representatives had constituents serving on the line. So that's why the support for right after 9/11 was so high from our legislative leadership, as well as the presidency and everybody else.
Yeah, I think it was really important because we come from a very small town in North Florida, and we had an armory there, and we actually mobilized those people, and several of them went and served during that time frame. And so it was a real situation where it wasn't something you were reading about in the paper. It wasn't somebody else's son, brother, or cousin. It was people you knew. And so I think it is very important that we come together as a nation. I think that's one of the things that somehow or another we got to find unity again as a nation for this nation to go forward and succeed. And so we want to encourage you, if you're watching today, that there are things that you can do. One of the things we need you to do, we need young men and women to still consider going down and talking to the recruiters. Look into, as you said, this profession, because it's something that's necessary for our country, but also it's something that would be good for you as well. And so I want to share a little bit today. We were talking about Iraq and when you served over there, some of the things that you actually witnessed and were a part of. So I wanted you to share some of your history today. Now, friend, we're going to come back again and again until we really, this is not going to be a one-time thing. We're going to tell stories along the way. We just wanted to give you broad strokes of basically what we're looking at. We're going to get more into like World War II. We're going to get more into the Korean War and those kind of things as we go through. So these stories will be of interest, and the reason you want to hear this is because history tends to repeat itself. And if we can learn lessons without having to relive the same things all over again, we're better off. So share with us a little bit about your time in Iraq and what you actually did and took care of while you were there.
Well, one of the biggest things I was doing, was part of in Iraq, was actually reconstructing businesses and institutions like the police force. One of the biggest things I had was the biggest oil refinery in the Middle East, which is in Beji, helping to reconstruct that oil refinery. We did not bomb it, but it was such disrepair that it couldn't even provide the fuel that was needed for their own vehicles in that country. In and about that, on some of the engagements that took place, I was in some minor skirmishes, obviously, and convoys, those kinds of things. There was quite a bit of that going on. Had a couple of close escapes in a couple of instances when I was there during that period of time. What struck me a lot was when I was out and about in the countryside. I've spent very little time at one of the bases. I was always out in the boondocks, so to speak. Was that there was a persistent and consistent effort to try to find weapons of mass destruction. I was telling Pastor Ken one time that I was at a schoolyard out in the middle of nowhere, and a couple of Blackhawks come swooping in. Black-clad guys get off. One of the guys comes over to me, who I recognized, and he was asking me, did that schoolyard have a basement and stuff like that? And I said, well, yeah. You know if there's anything in there? I said, no. But those guys took off, went in there, went downstairs, I guess, looking for weapons of mass destruction, which they did not find. Okay? They weren't there. They might have been, at some point in time, but I never saw it. Everywhere I went, I never saw it or heard a clue of any weapons of mass destruction being hid anywhere in the area of operations I was in, which was a quite large area. Covered almost every square inch of Baghdad when I was there. People would be surprised. Baghdad's size-wise is about the size of Tampa, but population-wise was 5.3 million people crammed in there. Services had been disrupted, and we helped restore services even from something as simple as trash collection. We were doing that. It sounds mundane for a soldier to be doing that, but those are some of the tasks that we had to do.
So military is not just about shooting people. It's not just about, bombs and those kind of things. There's other things that we have to consider as a military professional that have to be done, and depending on where you're at and what you have, the Colonel is going to share with us some of his time. One of the things that I know that you did was during the trial of Saddam Hussein, you oversaw that.
We did do that. One of my jobs was I was the deputy in charge of all the deck of cards, the 52. That also included Saddam Hussein. I've been as close to him as I am to Brother Ken right here. But at one point in time, we set it up for them to have an Iraqi trial for Saddam Hussein and some of the top tier guys of the deck of cards. Which one of them was Chemical Ali. So we set up a courtroom. We got an Iraqi judge, an Iraqi jury to conduct what they call a grand jury investigation. Coincidentally, their judicial system is kind of like ours. You hear about Sharia law, but they had a constitutional law set up like ours. So they have a grand jury investigation to find if they have enough information to indict on. So we set up a courtroom for them. We took the other 12 actors at that point in time, put them in a conference room because we were going to bring them out one at a time to read charges and specifications. The Iraqis are doing this, not us, are doing this. Crimes against the Iraqi people, the Iraqi country and stuff like that, where the charges and specifications being brought to each one of these guys. It was kind of it was interesting. Yeah, there's a couple of famous people in there. Peter Jennings, the correspondent we all remember. Christiana Amanpour was present in the courtroom at that point in time to watch these procedures. It was a very interesting day, and it started when Saddam was introduced to the judge, and he asked the judge, by whose authority do you have to pass judgment on me? The judge pulled out a decree, held it up, and on the bottom of it was Saddam Hussein's signature.
Wow.
And it went from that point in time.
Wow. So we're going to be talking about some experience that Colonel has had. And let me just say this, the Colonel happens to be my brother-in-law, and so if we sound a little confused on how to address each other, sometimes that might be why. So, Colonel, thank you for being with me today, and we're going to continue this discussion. We hope that you'll come back and watch us again on Akeldemah, the field of blood. That's really what Akeldemah means. So we're going to be talking in the future, and hope you'll be with us. Thank you.
God done shed his grace on thee. He crowned thy good. Yes, he did.